Spoon did not waste any time with the EK9, as Honda launched the Civic Type R in '97 and Spoon was racing it very shortly after. So for this build and tune, we're focusing on the number 95 EK9 that competed in the 1997 Fuji 6 Hours. Alright, so getting into the custom upgrades for the Spoon Sports EK9. For the engine upgrades, there's not a single thing that we have to do here as we are already at our horsepower targets. But for the chassis and the rest of the setup is where I put in the most work. So for the brakes, we have the race brakes. Springs, we have the race spring and dampers. We have the race ARBs in both the front and the rear with the full race cage. And then for our weight reduction, I have it set to the sport weight reduction, as going down to the race weight would put us way too far below our target. Then going over to our drivetrain for the clutch, this was left stock. Transmission, I only went for the sports transmission for the final drive tuning. Driveline was left stock as well. And then for the diff, I went with the race diff. For the tire and wheel setup, the tire compound, I have it set to the sport tire compound with 195s all around, so that will be the stock section tires. For the wheel design, the closest one that I could find was the Enkei TS5. And then for the wheel size, I left this at 15 in both the front and the rear. Now for the aero and appearance on the front bumper, I did go for the C West kit as it was closest to what the Spoon Sports EK9 had, although it is a little more squared off. For the wing, I left this stock as well as the rear bumper. And then for the side skirts, I left this stock as well. Now, another thing that I want to touch on as well is that for the displacement, we can't mimic a B18, unfortunately, so the closest that we can get is a 2-liter. So with the tire pressure, I kept that front pressure a little lower than the rear, only to help the front tires grip on turn-in. Now, since this is a front-wheel drive car, the front tires are going to be doing most of the work, so I wanted to give them a bit more help. The real EK9 used a 4.4 final drive, if I'm not mistaken, so that's what I tried to keep here. It also lets us keep the correct 5-speed setup instead of switching it to a 6-speed and doing an adjustment to drop off 6. Then going over to the alignment, the front has a bit more camber and a touch of toe out to make the car react quicker. Then for the alignment, the front has a bit more camber and a touch of toe out to make the car react quicker when you're turning in. I have the rear also kept a little calmer so the car stays stable when you're carrying speed through a corner. For the anti-roll bars, I have that rear bar a little stiffer than the front to help the car turn without making it feel twitchy. This will give the front end some help without making the rear suspension overly stiff. Over to the springs, I have the front just a little stiffer than the rear, which lines up well with the way that Spoon has set up EK9 suspension in the past. The dampening is kept fairly controlled with a little more support in the front where most of the weight sits. I didn't want to be too stiff, and that's because it's still an endurance style setup, so the car still needs to stay settled over a full lap. Looking at the braking, I kept a bit more brake toward the front to match the car's weight balance. This will keep the car stable under harder braking, but will still let it turn in when you start easing off the pedal. And then lastly, for the differential, I have this set strong enough to help pull the car out of corners without making it push too wide under power. I also kept some lock on decel so the car stays settled when you come off the throttle. And overall, the tune makes the EK9 feel quick and responsive, easy to control, and I feel it's true to the kind of setup that Spoon would have for their endurance car. Outside of the tuning process, this build is super easy overall, and it is a ton of fun to drive with how small and light the car is. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with all my replica builds.